We hope to just create more products that, contribute to people's well-being. We like to make tools that are really anatomically correct, something that a therapist would go, oh yeah, of course, this is going to help my patients, along with giving people the tools and the education at home just to, feel great, hit your athletic goals, do all those things.
Today's guest is Mike Mallory, the founder and head product designer of RAD, a massage and myofascial release company based in Denver, Colorado. As a former competitive skier and mountain biker, Mike has run the gamut of injuries in rehab, and he now creates tools to help himself and others feel their best. On today's podcast, we talk with Mike about how to properly do foam rolling, or technically called Self-Myofascial release, which we abbreviate as SMR. We're going to show you how to do that for optimum health and performance and answer a lot of great questions along the way. Get excited for today's podcast.
One thing that a lot of people don't know is joints really, if this was the knee, it's not a simple hinge. It doesn't just go back and forth. Really it slides and glides down. So there's translation this way and there's bending. So you have to restore all those ranges of motion. And in my case, when I went to move my ankle, it would just pinch in the front. I couldn't exercise through that. I couldn't stretch through it. But what I could do is get my ankle onto the RAD roller, kind of work out some of that range of motion. I would typically gain about 15 to 20 degrees.
All right, Mike, welcome officially to the Fit Father and Fit Mother podcast. We are so happy to have you here.
Good to see you again, Anthony.
So this is fun because what people don't know is that we spent some time together earlier this year filming a lot of great videos demonstrating some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, which is myofascial release, foam rolling, how to heal injuries. This is such a huge topic that's often set on the fringes of fitness because most people are interested in talking about workouts and nutrition and ways to reduce fat and build muscle. But I think from a sustainability perspective, the ability to keep your body feeling great, the ability to recover from injuries that are inevitable, let alone if someone's a bit of a daredevil like you, as we'll get into, is a huge part of the sustainability equation. So my goal and promise of this podcast today is we're going to get into how to do foam rolling properly, how to heal injuries in your story about that, and also why the products that you designed under your company, radroller.com, are some of the best tools available to do self-myofascial release. So, Mike, I guess the appropriate place to start as we get into this conversation is why you got passionate about myofascial release and foam rolling. Tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was probably 20 years ago at this point. I used to be a former competitive skier, competitive mountain biker, and by the time I was about 20 years old, you get through these sports and you've taken so many crashes and hits that honestly, my body just felt terrible. And for a 18 to 21 year old, that's just not a good way to go. Mm-hmm. So, at the time I was at CU Boulder, and they have a library there with just millions of books. So I just started reading up. I started kind of fixing some of my own problems. I started working in a clinic, helping other people fix their own, mostly back problems with me, because I definitely had some disc issues, but I'd already been through a few other injuries at that point. And at about then, when I was working in the clinic, you really figure out that a lot of people just, for better or worse, don't understand the basics. They don't know about foam rolling. They don't necessarily know how to stretch and mobilize. And so most of the time I was teaching people just kind of the 101 of this stuff. Here's how to stretch your quads. Here's how to mobilize your hip flexors, et cetera, et cetera. And my dad's a manufacturer, so it never really scared me getting into manufacturing or design or any of those things. So I started the company, RAD. And we started out with this guy here. So we were the first to mold these together, and what.
And for those listening, these are basically two rubber balls that are adjoined together with a small bridge. So two balls stuck together, kind of like a little smaller lacrosse balls, a little less hard.
Yeah. And silicone, to be exact. But when I was working at the clinic, we were dealing with a lot of people with low back pain. That was a big focus of ours, and we kind of like everywhere, you see people with a lot of locked up thoracic spines. And for
Mm-hmm.
anyone who doesn't know, that's the spine where the rib cage is attached.
Mm-hmm.
Right in the middle, and what happens with a lot of these people is their whole spine's so locked up, the low back isn't really designed to move that much. And they're
Mm-hmm.
essentially forcing range of motion into their low back,
Mm-hmm.
which is causing disc issues and cranky facets, et cetera, et
Mm-hmm.
cetera. So I wanted to basically take what I had learned, expand that out to a broader audience. And that's what actually started the company.
That's awesome. And I think you bring up our first point from an educational standpoint is often when we have pain patterns, they're due to deeper causes, that are more root to that. So you could start to have dysfunction in your, let's just say your mid back from years of sitting, which then could translate, like you said, to maybe some low back problems or a locked up hip, which then affects the counter shoulder on the other side. The body's always trying to create balance and stability. And when my biomechanics get locked up, like you just start to get these dysfunctional holding patterns in place. Is that something you resonate with? Does that sound right?
Totally. I mean, what I feel like is most people they would come to us in the clinic and be like, oh yeah, well, I fell on my back playing football when I was 11, and the guy's 50 years old or something like that. And, I get that stuff does cause problems, but the kind of rampant bad posture or, it's really not enough movement, not enough variety of movement that we see in most people.
Mm-hmm.
That patterning that you're talking about, whether you know it or not, just sitting in a chair all day like that is a pattern.
Yeah.
And you're going to be shaped like a chair when you get out of it.
For sure. It struck me too. I used to have, when I was bodybuilding, I used to side sleep, and I'd sleep on one of my sides, and I noticed that I started to have elbow tendinitis in that side because I'd literally be curling up with my whole tricep and elbow in this kind of stretch position for 8 hours with 200 pounds on top of it. So not surprising. And it just struck me. It's like, holy crap, that's my main postural pattern. I'm spending like 8 hours a day in that pattern. And so that really opened me up to thinking about body mechanics more broadly. And so I guess the question I'm going to ask, and someone's listening to this, they have some kind of painful area. You could use whatever example area you think. Walk us through like what kind of happens if we have a quote unquote bad knee or a bad shoulder, or like what's the compensation? How do we begin to like approach this using some self-guided therapies, foam rollers, balls, etc.?
Well, obviously a big question. If I would say number one, I think everybody needs to learn a little bit of basic anatomy, especially if you have an injury.
Mm-hmm.
If you've injured your knee, you either need to be taught a few things. You can go, certainly YouTube these days is crazy. You can find anything on there. You can go learn a little bit about the mechanics of the knee and what needs to be done to either strengthen, mobilize, etc. I mean, one of the things we teach with our tools, because people don't know their anatomy, and that's fine, is just to start exploring, explore some of that tissue. Like I've got a rod here, which is, a stick that you roll around. Go see what's going on in that tissue. Try it out, circle around the whole knee, see if you have any, obvious, like super tense areas in that knee.
And let's say we find one. Let's say we find one somewhere in the quad. Like, what's that called, and what does that mean, and what do we do about it when we find a super tender area that someone might call, oh, I have a knot, or wow, I didn't realize that area was so tender?
Well, one of the things we usually explain is that one of the secondary functions of muscles is that they're pumps. And I think all this information, but for everyone out there, the lymph system is a one-way system. It's got all these valves in it, and they're essentially one-way valves. So it's a one-way street of blood that's lymph that's going back into the system.
Mm-hmm.
Blood goes out, we get a lot of waste products that we need to refilter out of the system. So what happens when you have a tight muscle is effectively it's not a good pump. Things start to build up, and as a metaphor, it's kind of like the stagnant swamp rather than the clear river.
Yeah.
You want that muscle to be the clear river removing all these excess fluids that, can essentially cause inflammation, pain, stagnation, all these things. So number one, just exploring that area, trying some different techniques. Like, for instance, we teach, generally speaking, 3 techniques for SMR. One is pin and hold. That's where you take a ball, pin it to an area, and hold. That's just compression, right?
Yeah.
That does create a high pressure and a low pressure zone, which will move fluid through it. Also, flushing is one. That's just simply going up and down a tissue with.
Are you going in both directions, or is there one direction that you bias towards the heart, or does it just up and down is fine?
Good question. Generally speaking, back towards the heart. So we're trying to move that fluid back and really out of the system eventually. So yeah, flushing back towards the heart. The third one has to do with shear, and that's a little. Shear is really an engineering term for something moving laterally, forces moving in a parallel direction like that, which you would definitely use as a therapist. Anybody who's had a knee injury hopefully has had some manual therapy done on their legs. I know that's not everyone, but that's usually the kind of shear component. At home, you can utilize all these things as long as you know just some of the basics of the anatomy and the techniques. Certainly, if you're working with a therapist, they can show you these things.
Yeah. Well, I love starting with the concept of just the pin and hold, right? We explore, we find a tight area. We use some implement. It could be a foam roller, it could be a stick, it could be a ball, whatever we can tolerate to pin it. And then I'm just kind of going through my experience of what I would feel and what I do when I engage with this. And I'd love your reflections after that. Then you breathe and really relax, especially emphasis on the exhale, because in my understanding, we're trying to relax the nervous system, which is holding this neuromuscular holding pattern. We're trying to get it to relax. So there's a pressure component, but there's also like the psychosomatic neurological downgrading component, which the breath helps us do. And then I like to just wiggle a little bit side to side, which I think is probably giving me a little bit of that shear, these small micro movements. And that would be, I believe, a more effective way to hit an area until it now doesn't feel quite as tender, or maybe it reduces by like 50%, versus what you often see a lot of people do is just rolling really fast, like up and down a muscle in a back, which, hey, could be flushing, but I think typically people are just not doing enough slow, deliberate, hold, releasing pressure when they're doing this. Can you reflect on that?
Yeah, it's definitely one of the biggest kind of problems we see in just normal usage. When you see the real benefits of SMR, it's when you're really kind of taking the time, using some reps and sets, but more importantly, kind of what you're talking about is breathing for one, and then time under tension. So we really look for about 10 breath cycles when you're in one area. So if I pin and hold a specific area, number one, I don't want it to be insanely uncomfortable.
Right.
What we teach is if you're holding your breath, that muscle is probably guarding as well.
Yeah.
And we don't want a guarding response. We want that muscle to let go, signaling to the nervous system that that's a safe movement.
Yes. Which is also the argument for why you'd have many different implements, and why at RAD you guys have the full gamut from very dense hard balls to different structures of foam rolling type devices. So, I mean, there's a best tool for every area and every day. So it's nice to have more than one. Does that ring true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I originally created this tool set, my goal was really to have therapists use it as well, not only on people, but really as kind of a take home for them. I wanted them to have a trusted tool where they could say, hey, you've got this issue. We can't solve this in an hour here on the physical therapy table. You can go do this at home, and then we can work on the deeper stuff, when we get back to the clinic or whatever. Yeah. But that being said, there's a million things you can do on your home or on your own at home.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about it. It's like, I like this analogy. It just comes to mind easily. Like, we go to the dentist, many of us once a year, if you go, but you have a scheduled appointment. But to brushing your teeth every day is what matters the most. And I think the same thing, foam rolling effective foam rolling or self-myofascial release could even be as short as like 1 to 3 minutes on an area you have a problem, that if you did on a daily basis would help reset your patterns. But most people don't do it because they don't have these implements around their house. So, but like it could be really beneficial. I mean, if you're sitting in an office, like I think you should have a set of these things in the office. If you watch TV with your family, you should probably have a set of these balls and stuff like wherever your couch and your thing is, so that it just makes it easy for you to get down and just put some pressure on it. It's one of those things that's going to be nice for someone to listen to this, but your body structure will not change at all unless you actually put the reps in, which means, you need a routine, and typically tools are the basis of the routine.
Yeah, and you're spot on there, in terms of getting somebody better from an injury or just kind of feeling better. I mean, we're talking about like 5 to 10 minutes a day type of thing. We usually suggest spreading that whole thing out. In other words, not doing a 1 hour power hour on Sunday, but 5 to 10 minutes a day. And usually for someone like me, that's just kind of putting out the fires. Maybe I did sit at the office all day and maybe my neck is a little tight, so I'll work on it a little bit.
Do you like free stuff? Well, you're in luck, because Bioptimizer's Black Friday deal starts now, and they're giving away free gifts with purchase. That's right, I have an exclusive advance invite to Bioptimizer's Black Friday deal for the entire month of November. This is their best sale of the entire year. If you're feeling stressed out or haven't been sleeping well lately, you're not alone. You might not be able to change all the stress and chaos in your life, but you can start supplementing with one key nutrient that will improve your sleep quality, as well as over 600 other biochemical reactions in your body. Magnesium Breakthrough is the only product that I've found that has all magnesium forms in one convenient bottle, which means you'll open less bottles, spend less money, and still get the top 7 forms of magnesium that you need for better sleep, managing stress, balancing hormones, improving your mood, and feeling refreshed, all in one bottle. When you get all 7 critical forms of magnesium, pretty much every function in your body gets upgraded. And right now, for the entire month of November, Bioptimizers, the makers of Magnesium Breakthrough, are having a Black Friday blowout sale on all of their products. All month long, you will get discounts with my unique code, plus access to over $100 in free gifts with purchase. This is the best time to stock up and take advantage of all the free extras you're going to get. And you can only get this exclusive deal through my link, special for my audience. You won't find this deal on Amazon or even on the company website. So go to bioptimizers.com/fitfather and use code FITFATHER to get your discount and free gifts today. And one last thing you should know, all Bioptimizer supplements are best in class. And if for some reason you feel differently, you can get a full refund up to 1 year after purchase with no questions asked. Again, the link to go to right now for this exclusive deal is www.bioptimizers.com/fitfather. That's awesome. I love that. And I'm also thinking it's a good thing just to stack around a regular workout. So, I know when I used to be into very heavy weightlifting, let's just say I was doing deadlifts, it was mandatory for me to spend 5 to 10 minutes, like rolling out glutes, hamstrings, back, making sure everything was super prepped before I hit the lift. So I actually thought pre-workout foam rolling for me was most advantageous at that time. But I could also see it being good as a slight post-workout cool down if you want to work on something.
Were you using that more as a kind of
neurologic facilitation, making sure everything was good, probably some blood flow. I think it gave me the confidence to know that everything felt A-okay and I could pull hard that day. And if something didn't, I didn't necessarily do that. But I guess I'm making the argument that people should be flanking their workouts in either pre, post, or both with some kind of myofascial, because that's an extra 5 minutes in a routine you're already doing that will give you benefits beyond the workout.
Yeah, and I would just add to it, everything you said is stuff that's kind of in our educational programs. At the same time, I use it before my workouts just purely to gain range of motion. If I know I'm feeling a little restricted or whatever, I do it so I can maintain my good form during a deadlift. And that's true. I mean, that makes we need to be honest with ourselves. We all have those areas that are a little problematic for us based on injury history, our natural biomechanics and anatomy, or just stuff that tends to be tight for whatever reason. So that's stuff I think we need to address on an ongoing basis so it doesn't build up.
And the irony is, let's say we're in our 50s, meaning we probably have some degree of osteoarthritis or degeneration of our joints just because we're human and that happens. It becomes ever more important that we have strong muscles around that joint to provide stability, which means we need to be doing some strength training exercise, which means inevitably engaging muscles and allowing them to heal will create some tightness patterns. So it necessitates the intervention of myofascial release, or you're eventually going to hit a wall and then you won't be able to train for some time and then you lose your gains. And I think a lot of people fall into this. Like if you have a tendon issue on your triceps, it might be because the muscle of the tricep itself had been really bunched up in a certain area for a long period of time that created a pulling pattern that eventually led to a tendon issue. So I think it's maybe muscles get beat up from exercise first and they create patterns, and that pulls on connective tissue, which takes longer to heal. So I'm just trying to make this connection from my direct experience on this, and I'd love for you to share on that.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it, we can talk about some of my extensive injury past.
Yeah.
But, I got to start from zero a few years back, and I really got to feel the same thing.
What happened? Share with us. I think it'd be fun to share a little war story here.
Yeah. So a few years ago, I came home from the ski hill. So I'm in Denver, Colorado, right here. I came home from Keystone, Colorado, to where we did live, which was high in the mountains, and I just came home to plow the driveway. So we must have had a 600-foot driveway. I take the plow all the way down, push all the snow out of the way, which we had gotten a ton. I was just preparing for my wife and some of her friends to come back. Then I ended up with a 6-foot pile of snow, which of course I could build into a jump in about 5 minutes, which I did. And, just set up for a little quick 10-minute Instagram video just for fun. So I set my camera up, I go take the jump, I do a little flip, I land back on my feet. But what I did was I landed in like an old pile of snow. So my legs locked in, body went forward, and it just snapped both of my legs like instantly.
Oh.
Which, I got up from that, or I rolled around for a minute. I was thinking, that hurt, but, just breathe and we'll walk it off. And then I go to move and I noticed my knee was like, disconnected from my ankle type of thing. So I'll spare you the grueling story. I had to crawl back because I was alone and da-da-da-da-da. But anyways, 3 surgeries later, I'm back in a wheelchair. I'm thinking about my recovery, and about ready to basically get all these casts off, get out of the wheelchair and, really get started. So, this whole thing was a huge saga. It sucked, this and that. But, one of the positives that was kind of interesting for me is, I got to really start at square one, which is where I know a lot of our clients and our customers are at. Because when I got out of the cast on what I did was I had a pylon fracture of my tibia and my fibula on one side. So basically my ankle.
Both legs, both bones in the lower leg.
Yeah. And
then
it
snapped.
And it was a tibia plateau on the left side. So basically a big explosion in the bottom of my knee, that turned into a million pieces.
Oh my goodness.
But when I got out of that cast and everything, I hadn't done anything per doctor's orders for, I don't remember, 5 months or something like that. And my ankle felt like it would not move at all. Felt like there was a bony wall there.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I was a little less optimistic. But, when you get stuck in one of these situations, you got to trust the process, trust what you've, in my case, what I know and what I've seen, and just move forward. So that's what we did. I got a tremendous amount of manual therapy. And what I would do at home is, I have my little tool set here of, obviously I have everything I need. And I'd turn on Netflix for an hour, kind of get rolling. I would open up my whole ankle and then try to do some activation exercises after that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do this, for months and months on end, slowly that range of motion comes back.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is,
Because you're breaking up tissue that is adhesed through the healing process, and then you're driving blood flow. It's like healing is like blood flow, mobility, muscular coordination, sleep and
totally.
recover, and then do it again, and then do it again. And apparently you do it long enough and you have a restored ankle, which is a really hopeful and beautiful story. So keep on going.
Yeah. And the ankle is kind of especially a pain because all these joints are so tightly packed in. One thing that a lot of people don't know is joints really, if this was the knee, it's not a simple hinge. It doesn't just
Yeah.
go back and forth. Really it slides and glides down. So
Yeah.
there's translation this way and there's
Yep.
bending. So you have to restore all those ranges of motion. And in my
Yes.
case, when I went to move my ankle, it would just pinch in the front. So I couldn't exercise through that. I couldn't stretch through it. But what I could do is, get my ankle onto the RAD roller, kind of work out some of that range of motion. And then I would typically gain about 15 to 20 degrees. That's a temporary thing, as we know, or we can explain that a little bit more. But then you work into that range of motion, you do your exercises, and slowly over time, you gain that. And what I was talking about, I should probably branch into that just a little bit, is SMR really is a nervous system effect. Certainly there are physical effects. There is lymph. I think we all suspect there's a little literal tissue movement, but for the most part, we're talking about the neurological system. So in every muscle and every tendon, there's little receptors that are kind of like springs. When you stretch a muscle, those springs stretch, and that sends the information back to your brain to let you know where that joint is in space.
Yeah.
By pressuring those receptors, which really were just pressuring the muscle tissue, you can get that to relax for a period of time, which you can then work into and kind of gain that range of motion back in your nervous system.
You're gaining it back really you could think about it in your brain, in your spinal cord, like the communication. And I'm thankful for our bodies were designed this way. Like we get put in jail after an injury in a sense, like neurologically shut down because the body doesn't want to move through a big range of motion when it feels like a structure is unstable. Like same thing, you have a disc issue in your back muscles get tight to protect you from damaging a more valuable nerve by keeping you locked up. And so obviously fixing the root of it, a big part of that is relaxing that musculature and making safety come back into the nervous system. And it turns out like pressure, just like a hug or like a weighted blanket or using a RAD roller, pressure
I like that.
gradually
Like a hug.
is doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of the things that really kind of saved my butt because, like I said, when I got out of that cast and I saw just how bad my ankle actually was, I just couldn't believe it. But, it was kind of my point to put my money where my mouth is. It's like, well,
no kidding.
Cool. We'll go through and we'll do this. And, I trust that it'll work, but here's where we're at.
And before this call, I commented, I'm like, hey, how's life in Colorado? Ski slopes are opening up soon. You going? And you gave me an emphatic yes. So that's cool to know that, I know it's been many years later, but you're going to be ripping it on the slopes, going from an absolutely trashed ankle to back to a high level of ankle performance.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it feels great. And it's one of these things I kind of learned doing rehab. Really rehab should be, that's kind of how your life should be in general. And what I mean by that is when you break your legs or you do something like this, you have a real reason to get healthy again. When you're just a quote unquote normal person, you don't have this distinct reason. And that's, I think, why a lot of people don't participate in, exercise or mobility or all these things. But rehab is just a specific way of kind of functioning, exercising, mobilizing, and that just changes and suddenly it turns into athletic strength.
Yes. And I'm also thinking very, very, very fundamentally with the human body, when you look at someone and you know they're old because they have a postural pattern that looks jacked up. It looks like, wow, you've been on this planet for so long. You look like a short hunchback now. And their tissues are dehydrated, like their skin is wrinkled, their joints are not as mobile. And if you look at a baby, they can like bend their body in every which way. Their skin is plump and full of blood and collagen. And so I'm just thinking like the quality of our lives as we get older is dictated by our mobility, which is going to be dictated by how much we're investing in that mobility, like doing the things that are required to keep the body supple with good range of motion. Like, as if you don't do anything, these bodies are subject to just the decay that happens in the universe, like the physical decay that happens.
Well,
Thoughts
yeah,
on
and
that?
I got to experience that in a real way.
Yeah.
Because I sat in bed for 4 months, and
Mm-hmm.
I know, I'm sure you've probably seen the same thing in your own body to a certain degree, where if you injure a tissue, I mean, it takes 5 or 6 weeks and your muscles are gone, like
Yeah.
gone,
Yeah.
which just makes me think, well, what happens if you don't exercise for 3 weeks or a month,
Right.
or
I want
there's
to speak
certainly
in.
loss.
I want to speak into the mindset of many people who get injured and they feel like they need a baby in injury, or like it's brace and don't move it. And obviously there is a scenario where that is appropriate, like a fresh fracture that needs to be set so that it can actually build enough bone to be stable. But I see a lot of people that have like an issue that's kind of like a chronic nagging thing that probably would be addressable through these self techniques that we're talking about today, that just choose not to move, and they almost choose because they're afraid. Can you speak into that mindset of like actually how to like lean into mobility in an area that is painful?
Well, I guess a few things on that. One thing is the way we perceive pain. You know, pain is a pain is essentially, we have sensors in our body that detect pain. They say something's wrong, they cause the pain, or they create a pain signal
Mm-hmm.
effectively in your brain, but they don't necessarily say why. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, if you get knee pain, well, that might be because your hip flexors are tight, or you could have something wrong in your big toe that's causing this issue. I know Diane Lee, who's a famous physical therapist, she said the victims cry out, but the criminals don't. And that's a good metaphor for these type of things. Oftentimes the site of the pain, or what you see on an MRI, is not necessarily the pain generator. I'm not against MRIs or anything, but they don't find the pain generator, and it's usually up to the person or the therapist or whoever you're working with to actually go really investigate what's going on in a kind of total way, or at least more than just the site of the pain.
Yeah.
I lost track. What was your original question?
Well, I guess, one thing I think that is a valuable, just like nugget or technique to emphasize, is the idea that you have pain in a joint. Let's say it's your knee. You should be searching and scanning,
Oh,
working upstream and downstream of that area. That's just a good practical technique. There could be something tight in your calf. There could be something tight in your hamstring, your hip, and all that's interconnected because that's how the body works. I was asking about like someone who is afraid to get into motion. Maybe it's a bad shoulder, but quite frankly, some degree of mobilization would actually help the healing process. Like, how do we kind of like get into this? And you were talking about the nature of pain signaling.
yeah. I mean, that's one thing. The reason why I mentioned pain signaling is just it's a confusing science. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's confusing to the people who look into it at great depth, and that to me means you shouldn't be too afraid to go in and kind of change things and really try to fix what's going on. In terms of working through pain, I think we generally know the difference between something that's truly damaging pain
Yeah.
versus a kind of tolerable, acceptable pain.
Yeah.
I mean, we use this with SMR all the time because people say it hurts a lot of the time. And you kind of have to reframe. You go, well, does it really hurt? Does it
Mm-hmm.
hurt when I get off the tool?
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel better, worse, or the same? I had to work through that a lot with my legs. And, I really do think we have an inherent kind of capability of
Yes.
understanding if you listen to your body. And sometimes you have to tell your body, listen, this is what we're doing. It's going to be a little uncomfortable or, quote unquote, painful. But if you don't move it, it's going to be even worse. That much you can almost always guarantee.
Yes, because motion is lotion for the joints, because blood flow is where the healing factors and the nutrients come into.
And
And because pain and growth is built into the system. I think we could all remember back, it might be many years ago, we had growing pains in our legs or our back as we're getting bigger. Like, it's a natural part of the human body to experience some discomfort as change is happening.
mm-hmm.
And I cut you off a little bit there, so I want you to share, and then I have another point I'm interested in presenting as well.
Yeah, I was trying to jump in. Sorry. The kind of standard medical community even knows this stuff, and are really pushing it quite a bit. Like, for instance, if you get a knee replacement these days, oftentimes they'll send you home with one of those machines that just waves the leg up and down.
Yeah.
You just lay down and this machine kind of does that for you, because
Yeah.
that's just so much better than keeping it.
Stagnant. Okay, so like mosquitoes and decaying stuff grows in a stagnant pond. It doesn't grow in moving water. We are
Mm-hmm.
literally talking about fluid dynamics in the body. Like blood is
Yeah.
largely made up of water with proteins. These things are running in a plumbing system that we're calling arteries, veins, and lymphatic vessels. So it's like, yeah, obviously we need to move. And actually, the slowest healing tissues have the least blood supply. And even more so, one way to drive blood supply is massage and pressure, and like, pushing on something so you actually compress it. And then when you open it up, it creates this kind of like vacuum sucking effect that you've alluded to. So I think for those that are a little more physics oriented, you can start to understand how these mechanics will happen. For those that are a little more like linguistically like oriented or psychologically oriented, I think you brought up something really subtle but significant about the language we use around these practices. And I think it actually would have an actual outcome effect, where when people start to use language like this is painful, you're saying this is not safe, that I do not like this. And that language is encoding an idea that is represented in the nervous system.
Yeah.
Which is change the language. Like, I'm relaxing, I'm breathing through pain, I'm allowing it to melt. These visuals we have of like tightness melting, this is actually bringing your nervous system into safety, which is fundamentally what we're doing here. So like, language encodes a feeling, an idea that gets expressed in the body as the grosser structures. And it probably actually works on a DNA level too, like where epigenetic changes happen. I know the positive ones certainly happen when the body feels like it's in safety and energy abundance. We know that kids who have adverse childhood events and trauma, like sexual abuse, their mitochondria are more shut down, their nervous systems are all
Mm-hmm.
haywired. So it's like, we can talk on many levels, but like, it's a good reminder to watch our language, because it's actually creating a part of our reality.
Super important. And honestly, super important for therapists to know and understand as well. Just because, what you tell people is what they believe and, think. It's really important to have that, almost, I say delusional confidence when
Mm-hmm.
you're recovering from an injury.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you believe it or not, you got to stay positive and assume that you'll be back to 100%.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
and focus on what can move forward, on progress itself. I know, like, it's not lost on me that me being here with you, I've also had a life-changing skiing injury that took 7 surgeries, and there's still effects of that, 7+ years later. Like, it's how do you maintain hope and confidence amidst a hard thing? My 2 cents is you need to take joy in the bettering process and small wins, and joy and consistency. It's like this. It's this dance between having a vision and that confidence for a desired outcome, but also acceptance for exactly where you're at. And like, that's the art, I think, of healing. Is you need to accept. You can't deny the present situation. You engage with it with habits and practices, but you also hold simultaneously a vision for healing. And that seems like the truest way to proceed. What can you share on that?
I mean, I 100% agree with all that. It's all that, and then keep growing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing that I've seen so many radical transformations in people, just working with, not necessarily in tandem with, but through our company, we know so many therapists and osteopaths and chiros and da 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 da. And if you really see people go through all these programs, you will see them get better.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people that tend to drop off, or just kind of don't do the basics. I mean, I understand, like, we have busy lives, but it does, you have to keep moving. You have to keep doing some of this rehab stuff, as monotonous as it might be. You find ways to make it interesting. It's like I would just turn on Netflix, and that was my stretch and mobilize time. And otherwise, I'd just be sitting on the couch.
For sure. And because these only take 5 to 10 minutes, it fundamentally challenges, I think, the way many of us engage with our lives. And what I mean by that is, like, we have this idea of what a rich life would be like. You're pursuing many of your different interests. You're investing in your friendships. You're having new experiences. You're doing a whole bunch of stuff that's good for you, whether it's with your food or with your movement. And I think today we have all the ability to do that, in terms of, we have the 5-minute increments. We have the knowledge on places like YouTube or our websites or your brand to know how to do it. At the same time, we allow this just bleeding and wasting of time and attention to happen, where if we actually assessed what we're doing, we probably all have at least an hour to maybe 2 throughout the day that just kind of gets eaten up. That if that was divvied up and somehow, you could probably plant a garden, you could probably do your RAD roller, you could probably floss your teeth, and you could probably go on a walk with your family and get all that stuff in. So I suppose what I'm even feeling from this conversation, because we all know how important doing this myofascial stuff is, that it doesn't take a lot of time, is a fundamental challenge of everyone listening to upgrade your life and your performance to such a way that it becomes like non-negotiable that you don't get your 5 minutes in. Like, this is one of the most meaningful things you could do for your body. So how do we get to a point of upgrading our perspective where this is just, it gets baked in, it gets done because it's so good? That's just I got a little inspired by this idea of, like, how could we just not miss this? How could we just get this in regardless?
Well, usually, I mean, it's the kind of thing where it's easy to, once you get on a tool and actually, you take that 60 seconds, per area, or, you take a RAD roller and take 30 seconds on each level of your spine, you're going to stand up and feel so amazing that, that starts to stick, and it just starts to ingrain in itself. Wow, this feels a lot more comfortable in my spine. I'm breathing better. That's kind of all it takes. I mean, certainly for me, I mean, I know when I do this stuff, I feel more relaxed. My parasympathetic nervous system is engaged.
Yeah.
I feel like $1,000,000. So
Yeah.
I like some of these things where it's really easy to feel good. We all know we feel better when we exercise.
Yes.
It's a little steeper mountain to climb, of course.
I think during the workday is the perfect time, like little work breaks, because you're not working continuously for 5 hours. You're taking small breaks. And if you have these things around where you can just pop down, do a little bit, especially if you feel like you have tightness or you're stretching your neck and your back throughout the day, that's a slam dunk life improvement for sure. And the better you feel, the more you want to exercise. So it's all additive. I guess towards the end of this conversation, I have a couple more goals, what I want to get out here in this message of this. One is, I'd love for you to share a couple foundational, routines, but the high level basics of it using the RAD tools. So, like, for example, the RAD roller balls, if you're listening to sort of those 2 silicone balls that are attached together, what is something that someone could do if they had that tool? What is something that someone could do that's like high yield, pretty much good for everyone if they have a foam roller? Maybe those are like 2 that we could kind of go on. And in the process, we'll get to hear about the RAD tools themselves, which I want people to know about, because if you currently are not doing this and you need some gadgets, then RAD Roller has the great tools, and we'll share a special discount code as well in this episode where you can get some percentage off, which is always sweet.
I mean, I guess I'd start with, foundationally, if you want to kind of think like a therapist, you're always thinking from the spine out. Everything starts and ends in the spine. They've got some interesting research showing, which muscles of the spine engage almost before any others. If you want to throw a ball, like, you'll see the the multifidi and whatnot in your spine engage 15 milliseconds quicker. And that's to stabilize the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist,
Yeah.
etc. If you think backwards through that, you want to make sure you have spinal motion. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I don't know who said this, but it seems to be true that you're about as old as your spine.
Yeah. 100% agree with that.
So, with us, that's kind of the simple OG tool. That's the RAD roller, the double balls connected together. We created that for opening up the thoracic spine.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of the osteopathic community likes to think of that as, the true kind of center of the spine. And
Mm-hmm.
when we think about this as a therapist, it's like, we don't want to, the tail doesn't wag the dog. So we always want to start at the most foundational aspect. And, for that, we're effectively choosing the thoracic spine. If you can get that moving, you're creating a great foundation for your head and neck. You're providing a stable foundation for the shoulder blades.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting that range of motion in the T-spine rather than the low back where it's not
Yep.
really supposed to be. And you're helping yourself rotate. I mean, if you're a golfer, you should absolutely be doing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say start with the spine and then
So
work on
that would be taking the RAD roller balls, those two affixed balls, laying on the ground, but you could use a wall, but ground would be better probably for the pressure. Putting it somewhere, in the middle of your back, so the balls are on each part of the spinous processes, the bones that run up the middle, and then maybe giving yourself a hug or just sitting into that and doing some slight motions, maybe like flexing and extending the spine, taking some deep breaths, but pressure and light movement. And then we work our way up or down in a direction. Is that the basic technique?
Yeah, and for most people, it's going to feel fairly tight. So I don't even encourage movement when you're just starting.
Okay.
You're saying good things here. I would say that's a little more the amateur than the beginner.
Yeah.
When you start on a tool like this, they're softer than lacrosse balls, but coming back to some of those principles, you want to breathe, you want to relax, because if you're not relaxed and you can't breathe, your body is just going to be hanging on to that tissue. We want to let it go. We want to be able to relax through essentially every segment of the spine. And I'm talking about the thoracic spine here. So you spend 10, 20 seconds on each joint, and you don't have to be exact.
Yeah.
But you'll feel some huge gains there. I can almost guarantee it.
I typically feel this nice releasing pop, or technical term is cavitation, often in some of my thoracic vertebrae, and that get tight in the middle of my back from desk work. So I love it. And I also think that most people don't have the balls, the RAD rollers. So again, if you do go to radroller.com, we do have a discount code where you can at least get those. It's RAD. This is going to be all one word, RAD Fit Family 2024. Or if you're listening in 2025, it'll be RAD Fit Family 2025. And you get, I think, 15% off your order, and at least get some RAD rollers. That's really cool. Now, what if someone has a foam roller? What would be some foundational stuff with a foam roller that's generally good for everyone? And in the process, talk to us about why your run-of-the-mill foam roller, someone might find at a gym or a cheap one on Amazon, would be inferior to the two different types of foam rollers that you carry at RAD.
Well, I would say, generally speaking, first of all, usage-wise, it's like, again, almost everybody needs extension. I used to actually measure people's spines, and I only found a couple spines that were like way too straight. That would be an Olympic lifter and another guy who broke his neck. So he had to use his thoracic spine to kind of roam around. If you're using a standard foam roller, I would say, shoot for the big muscle tissues, like the quads, for instance. The quads are muscle that crosses effectively two joints, the hip and the knee. Whenever you have a muscle that crosses two joints, it can cause a lot of trouble if that muscle's tight, because it can tighten up the knee and the hip at the same time.
Yeah.
And again, just kind of shift back to some of these principles. Go slow, take your time. If you're working up the quad, generally speaking, I want to see people doing like 2 minutes. Like it should take a couple minutes to travel up one of your quads.
Nice.
And you'll feel that huge difference.
Starting down by the knee. vastus medialis. Yep. And then
Moving
kind of
on up.
working up. Yeah.
And the difference between, like a standard foam roller is mostly just shape and intent. Like this is really made for the spine.
Yeah.
In fact, it's sized up. So if you stick this in the middle of your low back, you're seeing a normalized 35-degree curve through the
And
lumbar
so if
spine.
someone's actually listening on audio, he's showing the smaller of their foam rollers that has a little bit of a divot in the middle where it can fit into your spine or any sensitive area. And it's got like it's a contoured engineered shape to it with some texture on it. So I guess you could say it's a more biomechanically designed foam roller. It's not just a straight foam block. It's got shape that will correspond to your body better.
Yeah, and generally speaking, we want to see a spinal recess for anything that's going on your back, so you're not rolling right on that spinous process. I'm sure almost everybody has the experience of doing sit-ups in gym class in high school on the bare floor, and your back's kind of screaming out at you.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So it seems like the big muscle groups are going to be great for the foam rolling. Take your time, work your way up towards the heart is a good just like principle and practice, and then pin, relax and breathe. This sounds awesome.
And the other thing is, I just want to encourage people to explore. I think that's something that people really don't do enough. They might have heard about doing this on your quads, for example. So that's all they do. You can completely encircle your leg. You can do your adductors, you can do your hamstrings, you can do your outer quad. And the same is mostly true for the whole body.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'd circle back. It's like, we know the difference between a true pain where there's, something wrong. I mean, it if you sit on a chair funny. That's a good reason just to, either ease up or change, but it's certainly not a dangerous thing to do, just to go around, exploring kind of all your muscle tissue.
Yeah. I love that. The curiosity in that, the play in that, exploration in that of our bodies. I also am excited for when we do release our detailed videos we created together onto our YouTube channels, because we do some cool things with using effectively like a modified yoga block that you have that can set in one of those balls. And I remember us getting into our adductors on that tutorial, and that's just like the inner part of the thigh muscles are amazing. So there will be some detailed stuff with us using and demonstrating RAD rollers to give you some ideas on how you can mobilize your body. And of course, you can also go to radroller.com and use that discount code RAD FitFamily 2024 or 2025 and get a discount. I want to end this with a couple just like rapid fire questions related to this space of myofascial foam rolling. What is your take on percussion guns, like the little, BB guns that people can get? Are those helpful? Like what's your take, and how does that fit into a recovery routine?
I would say they're generally good for recovery and generally good for kind of like if you had a painful tissue, like you had a strain in your muscle tissue that you're kind of trying to like numb out. I think they're good for moving lymph and whatnot, in terms of like postural correction and stuff like that. I wouldn't look towards that type of tool, but we certainly like them just for, recovery-based reasons.
Cool. Thoughts on using cold plunge or sauna as adjunct therapies for recovery? Do you have any take on that? And is there anything you use specifically?
I like them personally. Do I use them that often? No, just because I don't have access to a sauna right now, but I'm hoping to build one in the backyard here pretty soon.
Nice.
I love it because, again, you just think about moving lymph, moving fluid. What's better than sweating, right?
Nice. Yeah. And I think those are, I could ask you another personal fun fact question, but like where do you see RAD Roller as a company in 5 years or so? And maybe it could be a different time horizon that feels relevant, but you guys have been in the game for a long time. You make some amazing tools that people can check out. Like, where are you taking this thing? Where are you heading? What kind of impact do you want to be having in the landscape of physical fitness, rehab, and recovery? And that you're already having, truly.
Yeah. Well, we hope to just create more products that, contribute to people's well-being. We have some on the horizon that I can't talk about just yet, but again, RAD, as I talked about before, we like to make tools that are really anatomically correct, something that a therapist would go, oh yeah, of course, this is going to help my patients, along with giving people the tools and the education at home just to, feel great, hit your athletic goals, do all those things.
Well, awesome, Mike. Thank you for our conversation today, for giving a very useful, 50 or so minutes on foam rolling, healing, the landscape. I've been inspired multiple times in this conversation. I'm going to do more rehab myself, and I'm excited for us to continue, leaning into, this partnership and supporting one another and getting this information out to our community. Thank you so much for your time today.
Love it. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Fit Father Project podcast. If you love what you heard, please rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really helps spread this show to more men who need this valuable info. To watch full video episodes of this podcast and other motivational videos to inspire your training and more, visit our Fit Father Project YouTube channel. It's free and everything's made for busy guys over 40 like you. Visit youtube.com/Fit Father Project to get access to our entire video library. And finally, if you or someone in your life is interested in becoming a fit father or needs help losing weight, building muscle, and living healthier after age 40, then visit fitfatherproject.com, where you can see our proven programs, supplement line for guys 40 plus, and free meal plan and workouts to get you started. This is Dr. Anthony Balduzzi signing off. I'll see you in the next episode.